Well, I actually think that over time, the state in India has learned how to do counterterrorism better and better. And that terrorism is not the kind of strategic threat that it maybe is in the public mind and in the media, but that the real, if you look at deaths from terrorism have declined steadily. But if you look at where is the violence, where in our society and so on, it's from communal violence, polarization, that has actually gone up. Since 2012 onwards, it's been going up. And that for me is a real risk, because that leads to other things, leads to radicalization, leads to communities being alienated and so on. And social violence, part of this whole urbanization of ruthlessness, crimes against person, against women, the sense of, and that kind of personal insecurity, that I think is dangerous. I think we really need to do much more in terms of reforming the way we police, we run internal security. If you look at external security, external affairs, all these have been reformed pretty basically compared to what we inherited from the Raj. Internal security is the one area where we haven't actually changed the structures, changed the way we do things. If anything, we have actually lost some of the capabilities that we used to have, because we're no longer a settled society. For a police station to keep a list of 10 numbriyas today makes no sense. Nobody's stuck in a village or living around one police station. I tell you frankly, I think if you look at it, we had very few of the metrics of hard power before. This is new to us. So like anything that's new, we are
excited about it.
We're thrilled with it. We use it. I mean, you saw this with the Myanmar border, where you had new people doing things which we had done for many years, but they were so excited. Look what we've done, And this is part of the problem, that these are new tools, we have new capabilities, and this is natural, and this is human. I don't think you can hold this against people, but you have to put it in a context and remember that there's more to these problems than just the kinetics. And kinetics never solves it. It's a part of the solution, and can be a big part of it, but it's never sufficient. Well, from our point of view, I think it has 2 or maybe 3 sort of positive elements. It's the first time we've seen such high-level recognition by the Americans of the role of Pakistan and of how dangerous these safe havens are and what they mean, and to actually tell Pakistan to do something. We had heard it before at Secretary of State's level, when Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, told Pakistan that you can't nurture states and expect them only to bite your neighbor. But this is much, much stronger. And the linkage to Afghanistan and the situation. Secondly, he made it quite clear the Taliban can't come to power, which frankly is a much clearer goal than saying we will have a political settlement in which we will include the Taliban and we will bring them into the mainstream and so on. This, he was absolutely clear, and he laid down a sort of results outcome based approach rather than numbers of troops and dates and deadlines. And that's the third part, that there's no deadlines, so it's not just a question of the Taliban, the Al-Qaeda and the others, ISIS, waiting them up. So, I mean, to that extent it was good. Trouble is, all 3 elements have been diluted immediately by people in his own government. Rex Tillerson, for one, Nicholson, the general, saying that, but Taliban has to be brought into the political process. I mean, if your whole goal is to exclude them and defeat them, then how are you, so it's very hard. And the speech itself was very weak on specifics. Very hard to see. Pakistan, of course, will do what it can to avoid, any cuts in aid or any diminution in its role in Afghanistan, or to prevent any increase in India's role, which is what Trump has actually specifically asked for. And they will use whatever levers they have. Other friends, they've got the Chinese to make statements. They control NATO supply lines into Afghanistan. 2011, they actually cut them and use them, and it seemed to work that time. So, that threat is always there. So this is still a fluid situation. We are still not clear what exactly the Americans have in mind when he says India should do more economically, that we are doing anyway. I think we've already done more than $2 billion. I mean, and we will help Afghanistan to develop Afghanistan. We have Afghan students. I saw a large number somewhere. 16? I saw something like 16,000 somewhere. I saw, which is a huge number if that's true. I don't know. That part of it, the development, the assistance, that I think will go on. Institution building. That if he's looking for a direct Indian military role, frankly, I mean, that risks two things. It risks bringing us into direct military conflict with Pakistan's proxies, but even with Pakistan, because that's one thing that, in fact, the Pakistanis use as their excuse to justify all their bad behavior and their support for these terrorist groups, and they're nurturing these groups. So I'm not sure whether that is what they expect. Let's see. Mattis is coming. Tillerson's also coming. I think by the end of the month we should have a fairly good idea of what this means in actual practice, because the speech, to that extent, I mean, it was billed as a big policy, but it's not really a policy, because you don't see the implementation part of it. You see a couple of headline statements, some big goals, some improvements on the previous administration's Afghan policy. As I said, these three things. But otherwise, I mean, let's see whether what exactly is the situation, how it works out. What, for me, the biggest hole in this is you cannot think of a regional approach to a settlement or to improving the Afghan situation without Iran, without Russia. And there was no mention of any of this, and certainly no recognition of this, of Iran's role and so on. So if the idea is, as Nikki Haley said, regional solution, we're going to let the regional powers do things, which India is more than ready, always has been ready to work with others to try and stabilize Afghanistan, defeat terrorism in Afghanistan or coming out of Afghanistan. Then I think it has to include everybody. And that was a big hole in this policy. Well, I think it's a very good judgment.
And why so?
Because I think actually the right of privacy needs to be maintained. But my problem is that the domain itself, cyber, and the technology makes privacy almost impossible. And you can have good judgments, good laws, if Parliament decides, etc. But who will it constrain? It constrains the government. Government will follow its own laws, I presume. It constrains the law-abiding citizens. But the real threats to privacy today come from the corporations who actually control your data. And a lot of, what we see, the whole domain actually is a domain of anarchy where there are very concentrated, a few large corporations control it, and those who actually do not respect the law. So the threats to privacy from these two, they're not addressed by passing laws or having good Supreme Court judgments, at least not this kind of judgment. Because where does it restrict? You can mitigate the effects of what corporations do. You can say you can only keep this kind of data, keep it for so many days, do these, you can do, but that's mitigation. It doesn't actually solve the problem of what's happening today in the domain. So I think this is all very well, so far as it goes. But you also need to have a much bigger conversation about, and change your definitions of privacy actually. You can't carry on with the old habits or expect the same things to work in cyber. I assume that everything I do on the net, on the web, is open.